I am Lucia, 33 years old, an Air Force ghost that my own flesh and blood knows absolutely nothing about. Inside the main briefing room at MacDill Air Force Base, surrounded by 200 high-ranking officers, the smell of burnt coffee and a suffocating silence took over when my father, General Neves, laughed right in my face. He pointed a finger, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Sit down, Lucia. You are an absolute zero. Do not embarrass me." He had no idea that the man who had just kicked the double doors open, a highly decorated Navy SEAL colonel, did not come to see him. He came looking for me. And my call sign is not the general's daughter. My father thought he was the most powerful man in the room. But when I spoke the words, Ghost 13, the color drained entirely from his red, bloated face. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Drop a comment saying justice and subscribe to the channel if your own family has ever looked down on you. This is a story about the heavy price of arrogance. The air conditioning unit in Briefing Room Alpha hummed with a rattling metallic grind. It was a miserable sound that dug right into the back of your skull. The room smelled like industrial floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap Folgers coffee that had been cooking on a hot plate for 5 hours. I sat in the very last row, my back pressed hard against the cheap plastic of the folding chair. Spine straight, shoulders squared. My dress blues were pressed sharp enough to cut glass. I kept my breathing shallow and slow. It is a physical habit. When you spend enough time lying flat in the freezing mud controlling your heartbeat to make a single shot, you forget how to breathe like a normal person. You just observe. Up front, taking up all the oxygen in the room, was my father, General Arthur Neves. He occupied the center seat in the front VIP row like an old king holding court. His silver hair was cut high and tight, catching the harsh fluorescent light above. He leaned back, spreading his legs, one arm draped over the empty chair next to him. He was laughing loud and deep at some terrible joke a nervous major had just told. It was a booming, heavy sound, the kind of laugh specifically designed to remind everyone else in the room how small they were. He wore his rank like a heavy gold watch, flashing it around so nobody could miss it. He never looked back. Not once. He did not care that I was sitting exactly 50 feet behind him. To him, I was just another uniform filling a dark corner, a prop for his background. The heavy oak doors at the front of the room did not just open. They shoved inward with violent, heavy force. The brass hinges groaned in protest. The low, polite murmur of 200 officers died instantly. Colonel Marcus Hale walked in. Navy SEAL, Tier 1. He wore faded desert camouflages that looked like they had actually seen the sun and the dirt. He stood in stark, ugly contrast to the shiny metals, the starched collars, and the polished leather shoes surrounding my father. Hale had grease under his fingernails and eyes like cracked winter ice. He did not bother to salute the room. He did not wait for permission to speak. He walked straight to the podium, put his thick hands flat on the wood, and stared down the brass. "I need a shooter," Hale said. His voice was gravel and rusted iron. "Top secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearance. Sierra Tango designation. We have a hostage situation moving fast, and I need a long rifle specialist who does not miss. Right now." A heavy, dead silence dropped over the room. That kind of clearance meant ghosts. People who did not exist on regular military rosters. People who did the ugly work so men like my father could wear clean white gloves. The officers looked around, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. General Neves sat up straight, clearing his throat loudly, adjusting his tight collar to assert his dominance over the sudden interruption. He opened his mouth, ready to offer up one of his golden boys. I did not wait for his voice. I pushed my chair back. The metal legs scraped harshly against the cheap linoleum floor. It was a loud, ugly noise in the dead quiet of the room. I stood up. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the back of Hale's head. My heart beat once, slow, controlled. I was the only person in the room on their feet. 200 heads turned. Then my father turned around. His eyes hit me. For a split second, there was blank confusion. Then the anger flashed, hot, ugly, and immediate. His jaw clenched so tight the bone popped. The veins in his thick red neck pushed against his collar. He did not ask what I was doing. He did not pause to consider why I was standing up for a Tier 1 sniper call. He just reacted with pure ego. Sit down, Lucia, he barked. It was not a request. It was the crack of a whip. His voice echoed off the cheap acoustic ceiling tiles. Colonel Hale narrowed his eyes, but my father was already turning away from me, looking at the officers around him. He waved a hand in my direction. A dismissive swatting motion like I was a dirty fly buzzing around his expensive steak dinner. I apologize for the interruption, gentlemen, my father said, forcing a loud chuckle. My daughter works a desk in logistics. She tends to get a little confused about her pay grade. The sycophants in the front rows chuckled on command. A ripple of nervous sucking up laughter washed through the room. Men with silver birds on their shoulders turned back to look at me, their faces caught somewhere between pity and pure amusement. Desk jockey. Confused. The words hit my chest like a physical blow from a heavy hammer. I stood absolutely still. The blood drained completely out of my face, leaving my skin cold. The draft from the rattling vent above hit the back of my neck, but I felt like I was burning alive. I was stripped naked in front of the entire command, reduced to nothing. I looked at my father. He was already looking away, his chin raised high, soaking in the approving smiles of his peers. Pride comes before the fall. But right then, he was not falling. I was. He leaned forward to grab his coffee mug, and as he shifted his weight, the draft from the vent carried something straight to the back row. The sharp, overwhelming scent of Old Spice aftershave. It hit the back of my throat. My vision blurred. Suddenly, the sterile concrete walls of MacDill Air Force Base faded away. The smell dragged me backward by the hair, ripping me away from the brass and the uniforms, throwing me roughly onto the hardwood floor of a suburban dining room in Virginia. It dropped me right into the middle of a Thanksgiving dinner I had spent 15 years trying to bury. The sharp chemical tang of Old Spice aftershave burned the back of my throat. I blinked. The gray concrete walls and the rattling air conditioning vents of MacDill Air Force Base suddenly dissolved. The oppressive silence of the briefing room was violently ripped away, replaced by the deafening, chaotic noise of a Dallas Cowboys game blasting from a flat-screen television. I was not 33 years old anymore. I was 18. The year was 2009. I stood in the hallway of my family's wood-paneled house in Alexandria, Virginia. The air was thick and heavy, suffocating under the smell of roasted garlic, melting butter, and the sweet, sickly scent of my mother's pumpkin pie, burning slightly at the edges. It was Thanksgiving, the great American holiday, a day for family. In the living room, my older brother Daniel was sprawled out on the expensive leather recliner. He wore a stained gray sweatpant and held a cheap can of beer resting on his stomach. Daniel had just dropped out of his second state college. He failed 4 classes and totaled his car in a drunk driving incident the month before. My father stood next to the recliner. The great General Neves. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. "Do not worry about the grades, Danny," my father said, his voice dripping with warm paternal forgiveness. "The academic system is rigged anyway. It takes time for a real man to find his path. You will figure it out." I stood in the doorway. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline. In my right hand, I held a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was my official acceptance letter into the United States Air Force. I had scored in the top 1% on the ASVAB test. I'd spent 6 months running in the dark, doing push-ups until my knuckles bled on the driveway gravel, preparing myself to be perfect, to be worthy. I walked forward and held the paper out to him. My father did not smile. He did not put his hand on my shoulder. He took the paper, glanced at the heavy military seal for less than 2 seconds, and shoved it back into my chest. "Air Force," he snorted, taking a slow sip of his scotch. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal glass. "What are you going to do there, Lucia? Nursing or logistics? Do not get any pilot fantasies in your head. The military is a man's world. Try not to embarrass the family name by failing out of boot camp." He turned his back on me and went back to watching the football game. I walked into the kitchen. My mother stood over the granite island, her knuckles completely white as she aggressively mashed a pot of boiled potatoes. She had heard every single word. She always did. I looked at her, waiting for a defense, waiting for a mother to stand up for her daughter. She kept her head down. She poured heavy cream into the bowl and let out a long, exhausted sigh. Try to understand your father, Lucia, she whispered, her voice devoid of any real emotion. He's under a lot of pressure at the Pentagon. Just be a good girl. Do not push him. She traded her voice and her daughter's soul for a quiet life in a nice suburban house. Years passed. I did not fail out of boot camp. I became a machine. But the harder I pushed, the less I mattered. I remembered sitting on the faded carpet of my childhood bedroom during a brief weekend of leave. I pulled a heavy cold metal ammunition box from under my dusty bed. I opened the latch. Inside, resting in the dark, were my ribbons. The expert marksmanship badge, the top shooter awards. I kept them buried. I had to. The one time I made the mistake of pinning that silver badge to my uniform, and walking downstairs, my father looked at my chest and laughed. A cold, dismissive sound that scraped against my ribs. A woman holding a rifle is just a photo op for the recruitment brochures, he mocked. Real war is for men. Go help your mother clear the dining table. I walked upstairs, went into the bathroom, and took the badge off. My hands shook so badly that the sharp metal pin pierced the meat of my thumb. A single drop of dark blood swelled up and fell into the white porcelain sink. I watched the water wash it down the drain. I learned that day that my achievements were insults to his ego, but the final cut, the one that severed the nerve completely, happened 2 years later. I was lying on a stiff paper sheet covering an examination table in a freezing military infirmary. I smelled iodine floor bleach and my own dried sweat. I had a fractured collarbone and 3 bruised ribs from a brutal combat survival exercise in the mud. Every time I inhaled, white-hot pain stabbed through my chest. I held my cheap, cracked cell phone in my left hand. I had called him twice. He declined both calls. Finally, the green light blinked. A text message. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark room, hoping for a sliver of concern. A simple question asking if his daughter was alive. The text read, "Told you the military was not for you. Pack your bags, come home, and get a husband before you ruin your face permanently." Or, if you have ever poured your absolute heart out to a parent only to be handed a mop or told you were not good enough, leave a comment down below saying, "I am enough," and subscribe to this channel. I need to know I am not the only one walking this lonely road. I did not reply to the text. I let the phone slip from my fingers. It hit the cold concrete floor with a harsh crack. The screen went completely black. I lay in the dark, staring up at the water stains on the ceiling tiles, my chest rising and falling in shallow, painful breaths. A cold, hard realization settled in my stomach like a swallowed stone. Why do I keep bleeding for a man who will not even look at me? I stopped bleeding for him. I started bleeding for me. That was the answer. I lay in that freezing military infirmary, staring at the cracked screen of my phone, and I finally made a choice. I stopped waiting for General Arthur Neves to look my way. You cannot force a blind man to see your worth. You can only forge yourself into something so hard, so sharp that the world has no choice but to feel your edge. I checked myself out of the infirmary 2 days early. I taped my fractured collarbone tight against my chest, laced up my boots, and hit the asphalt. I shoved cheap earbuds into my ears, cranking David Goggins's "Can't Hurt Me," until the volume drowned out the sharp, stabbing pain in my ribs. I ran until my lungs burned like swallowed battery acid. I ran with a 60-pound ruck, cutting deep, angry red grooves into my shoulders. I stopped being the general's disappointment. I became a machine. Then came SERE school. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. They try to break you. They strip away your dignity, your sleep, your warmth. Most of the men in my class rang the bell and quit by day 4. I did not. To be a sniper, you do not get to be a human being. You become part of the dirt. For my final field test, I spent 3 days lying flat on my stomach in a Georgia swamp. The ghillie suit weighed 30 pounds, soaked through with stagnant, foul-smelling water. Fire ants chewed on the back of my neck. I did not scratch. I did not swat them away. I pissed my pants to hold my position because moving even 2 inches meant failing the course. The smell of ammonia and rotting leaves filled my nose. I lay there staring through the scope, controlling my heart rate until it was just a slow, steady drum in my ears. There was no "daddy's little girl" out there in the mud. There was only survival. 6 months later, they dropped me into the mountains of Kandahar, Afghanistan. It was 110 degrees in the shade. The air was so dry it cracked the inside of your nose. Fine brown dust stuck to the sweat pouring down my neck. I was perched on a rocky ridge, peering through the optics of my M24 sniper rifle. Down in the valley, my squad, a heavy weapons team, was moving through a narrow choke point. Through the glass, I saw the threat. 2 men digging frantically into the dirt road ahead of the convoy. IED, an improvised explosive device. One of them raised an AK-47 aiming right at the lead Humvee. My hands started to shake. A violent sudden tremor in my fingers. It was my first real target. Not a paper silhouette. A living, breathing human. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. I thought of the cold sneer on my father's face. A woman holding a rifle is just a photo op. The shaking stopped. My blood ran completely ice cold. I adjusted the elevation, accounted for the crosswind. Exhaled a slow, measured breath, letting the air completely out of my lungs. I squeezed the trigger. The heavy recoil slammed into my bruised shoulder. The metallic, sharp smell of burnt gunpowder filled the tight space of the hide. Through the scope, the man with the rifle dropped like a sack of wet cement. The second man scrambled away into the rocks. Down in the valley, my radio crackled. Good hit, we owe you a beer over. I racked the bolt, ejecting the smoking brass casing onto the rocks. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel panic. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I was good at this. I was a lethal weapon, and I belonged out here. When my deployment ended, I caught a military transport flight back to the States. I had been gone for 6 brutal months. I had 2 confirmed kills and a commendation letter from the base commander folded in my pocket. I took a cab from the airport to Alexandria. I just wanted a hot shower and a real bed. I opened the heavy oak door of my parents' house. The heat hit me instantly. The house smelled like baked brie cheese, roasted garlic, and expensive Cabernet wine. My father was hosting a cocktail party. The living room was packed with politicians, defense contractors, and high-ranking brass. I stood in the foyer. I was wearing my combat boots, faded jeans, and a plain black t-shirt. My hands were calloused, my knuckles scarred. I carried a heavy green duffel bag that smelled like sweat and desert dust. My father stood by the fireplace, holding a crystal glass of scotch. He saw me. For a fraction of a second, his jaw tightened. His eyes darted nervously around the room, making sure none of the VIPs noticed the dirty, rough-looking woman standing in his pristine hallway. He walked over quickly, cutting me off before I could step onto the Persian rug. He grabbed my elbow, his grip tight and warning. He turned to a fat, red-faced senator standing nearby, flashing a wide, fake smile. "Ah, Senator, look who finally decided to come home," my father boomed. He slapped my shoulder hard. "Lucia just got back from a backpacking trip across Europe. You know kids these days, taking a gap year to go hike the Alps and find themselves." The senator chuckled, raising his glass. "Good for her. Get the travel bug out of your system before you settle down at a desk, right?" My hand tightened around the nylon strap of my duffel bag until my knuckles turned bone white. A backpacking trip? He erased it. He looked right at the scars on my hands, the hollow exhaustion in my eyes, and he bleached my blood out of the picture. He completely denied my service to protect his fragile, perfect country club image. I did not scream. I did not correct him. I just stared into his eyes. I saw the absolute cowardice hiding behind his expensive suit. I turned around, pulled the front door open, and walked back out into the freezing Virginia rain. I did not go back to that house. I went back to the base, back to the only place that made sense. Within a year, the guys in my unit stopped calling me Neves. They started calling me Ghost. Because I took the hardest deployments, did the ugly, brutal work, and completely vanished when it was time to hand out the medals. I never asked for credit. I never stood in the spotlight. It was a survival mechanism. I learned how to be invisible at my father's dining table, and I perfected it in the desert. The rain sliced sideways in the dark. My 60-pound bag cut deep into my shoulder, but I did not stop walking. I walked until the neat, manicured lawns of suburbia faded away. I walked until the streetlights buzzed with a cheap electric hum. Up ahead, a flickering neon Coors light sign cast a dirty red glow across the wet pavement. I stepped up to the curb, reached out, and pushed my weight against the heavy splintered wood of the bar door. The heavy wooden door of the dive bar scraped loudly against the uneven, warped floorboards. The smell hit me the second I stepped inside. Stale draft beer, dried mustard, and decades of embedded cigarette smoke trapped in the cheap acoustic ceiling tiles. It was a beautiful, ugly smell. It smelled exactly like reality. Johnny Cash was grinding out a low, mournful tune on a glowing jukebox in the far corner. Above the long bar, a neon Coors light sign buzzed with an electrical defect, casting a flickering red glare across the sticky wooden counter. I walked in and dropped my 60-pound green duffel bag onto the cracked linoleum floor. It hit with a heavy, dead thud. Nobody flinched. The men and women drinking in here were not politicians. They were not defense contractors looking for a golf buddy. They were operators. People with calloused hands, faded tattoos on their forearms, and eyes that constantly tracked the exits. I fit right in. I sat on a wobbly vinyl stool at the far end of the bar. The bartender, a guy with a thick gray beard and a dirty apron, slid a frosted glass mug of cheap draft beer toward me. He did not ask what I wanted. He just knew. I wrapped my scarred, scraped knuckles around the freezing cold glass. The condensation dripped down my wrist and onto the scratched wood. Then a heavy hand clapped down hard on my right shoulder. The grip was solid, immovable. I did not tense up. I recognized the specific weight of it. I turned my head. Colonel Marcus Hale stood right beside me. He was out of uniform, wearing a faded black t-shirt that stretched tight across his thick chest and a pair of worn-out denim jeans stained with motor oil. We had shared the Kandahar Valley 6 months ago. He was the commander of the heavy weapons team I had covered from the high ridge. Hale did not look at me the way the men at my father's cocktail parties looked at me. He did not scan me up and down. He did not see a woman, and he did not see a decorative piece of background furniture. He looked straight into my eyes, and he saw a loaded weapon. He respected the weapon. He pulled up the stool next to me. He raised 2 fingers at the bartender, signaling for 2 shots of the cheap house whiskey. "I heard you were back in the States, Neves," Hale said. His voice was pure gravel, competing easily with the sharp clack of pool balls breaking in the back room. "I owe you a drink." The bartender slid the 2 small glasses across the sticky wood. I looked at the amber liquid, then up at him. "You were the eye of God up on that ridge," Hale said. His expression was completely flat, dead serious. My boys walked right into a fatal kill zone. If you had missed that first shot by a single inch, I would have shipped 3 good men back to Delaware in black body bags. You kept my team breathing. He raised his glass. I raised mine. The cheap whiskey burned a hot, clean path straight down my throat, settling deep in my chest. For the first time in 10 years, the tight coiled steel spring inside my chest finally relaxed. My shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. A small, genuine smile broke across my face. It felt strange, almost painful. My facial muscles were not used to the movement. Hale's words hung in the stale air, heavy and absolute. You kept my team breathing. It was the exact validation I had bled for. It was the absolute truth I had desperately waited to hear from my own blood. But my father had only ever offered me a mop and a broom. He is right, you know. I looked to my left. Master Sergeant Elena sat 2 stools down in the shadows. She was a lifer. 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair pulled back into a severe tight bun and deep, weather-beaten lines carved around her dark eyes. She held a lit cigarette between her fingers, resting her elbows heavily on the bar. Elena was a legend in logistics and intelligence. She had survived 3 miserable divorces and 4 brutal combat tours. She took a slow, deep drag of her cigarette. The cherry burned bright orange in the dim light. She exhaled a thick cloud of gray smoke toward the ceiling fan. "I know exactly who your father is, Lucia," Elena said. Her voice was raspy, permanently ruined by 30 years of cheap tobacco. "I have seen the general operate. He loves the shiny gold medals. He loves the cameras. He loves the applause." She turned her head and locked her eyes onto mine. There was zero pity in her look, only cold, hard, tactical facts. "Do not let the old man's shadow block your sun," Elena said quietly. You are out there doing the ugly things he only reads about in air-conditioned classified briefings. He's not disappointed in you, kid. He's jealous of you. The words hit me like a physical punch right under the ribs. Jealous. I stared at the peeling paper label on the beer tap. The entire architecture of my childhood violently shifted. The constant belittling, the hidden ribbons under the bed, the absolute refusal to acknowledge my marksmanship scores. It was not because I was a failure. It was because my existence fundamentally threatened his ego. He needed me to be weak, soft, and compliant so he could feel strong. The warmth of the dive bar wrapped around me. I took a deep breath. I looked at Colonel Hale. I looked at Master Sergeant Elena. This was my actual tribe. These were the people who judged you by the empty brass casings on the ground, not by the blood in your veins. I picked up my cold beer, finally ready to drink, to my new reality. Then the peace shattered. A harsh, vibrating buzz rattled loudly against the sticky wood of the bar counter. I looked down. My cracked phone screen lit up, casting a pale, sickly white glow in the dark room. It was a text message. The sender name read General Neves. I stared at the screen. The words glowed like absolute poison. Come home early tomorrow morning. The yard is a total mess. Clean the patio and set up the folding chairs. Your mother needs help prepping the meat for the VIP BBQ. Do not be late. I sat perfectly still. The noise of the country music and the clatter of the pool balls faded into a dull, distant hum. I looked at Colonel Hale, who had just treated me like a savior. I looked at the text message, which treated me like a hired maid. I slowly reached out and turned the phone face down against the wet wood. The officers' club in Tampa was loud. Exactly 1 week before the briefing at MacDill Air Force Base. It smelled like expensive cigars, roasted beef tenderloin, and old money. A dull jazz band played in the corner, completely drowned out by the overlapping chatter of defense contractors and high-ranking brass. The old guard. Men who fought wars from leather chairs and air-conditioned rooms. I stood near the heavy mahogany doors. I wore my dress blues. Captain's bars pinned perfectly parallel to the collar edge. Every ribbon aligned to the millimeter. My boots held a mirror shine. I kept my back straight, my chin parallel to the floor, scanning the room by pure habit. My father spotted me from across the room. He was holding a crystal tumbler of brown liquor. He excused himself from a group of red-faced senators and walked straight toward me. He did not smile. His eyes dragged up and down my uniform, his upper lip curling in absolute disgust. "Why are you wearing that?" he asked. Not a greeting, a reprimand. "It is a formal military function." I kept my voice flat neutral. "I am a captain." He let out a short, ugly breath through his nose. "You look like a man, Lucia. Could you not find a decent dress? A skirt? Try to look like a lady for once. You are embarrassing me in front of my colleagues." He did not wait for an answer. He turned his back and walked away. I swallowed the hard lump in my throat. I did not flinch. You do not flinch when you are in the crosshairs. I moved away from the entrance and stood near a tall cocktail table. 2 first lieutenants from my old logistics unit walked over. Good kids, hard workers. They saluted, then relaxed, asking me for advice on an upcoming deployment rotation. For 5 minutes, I was an officer. I was respected. Then the heavy smell of Old Spice and bourbon rolled up right behind me. My father stepped into the circle. He brought a 3-star admiral with him. The 2 lieutenants instantly stiffened their spines, snapping straight eyes, darting nervously to the floor. My father did not look at them. He looked right at me. He put a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. His fingers dug hard into my collarbone. "Gentlemen," my father boomed loudly, making sure the surrounding tables could hear him. "Have you met my little girl, little girl? I'm 33 years old. I have survived Kandahar. I have 2 confirmed kills from over 1,000 yards away. I am a lethal weapon." But in this room, under the glittering chandelier, he stripped all of it away. The lieutenants shifted uncomfortably. They did not know where to look. Their respect for my rank instantly evaporated under the crushing weight of the general's dominance. "Lucia, sweetie," my father said. He held out his empty glass. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. "Be a good girl and run over to the bar. Fetch me another bourbon. Neat. and get the Admiral a gin and tonic." Silence dropped over our small circle. He did not ask. He commanded. He took a decorated military officer and turned her into a cocktail waitress right in front of her own subordinates. He did it specifically to break my legs, to remind me and everyone else who owned the room. The heat rushed up my neck. My jaw locked so tight my teeth ground together. I looked at the lieutenants. They were staring at their polished shoes. I looked at the Admiral. He was smiling, completely oblivious to the execution that had just taken place. I reached out. I took the empty glass from his hand. My fingers brushed his. His skin was warm and sweaty. I turned around and walked to the bar. I ordered the drinks. I waited, watching the bartender pour the liquor. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the brass rail until my knuckles turned completely white. I picked up the 2 fresh drinks. The heavy glasses felt fragile in my hands. I wanted to hurl them against the brick wall. I wanted to watch the glass shatter. I walked back. I handed the gin to the Admiral. I handed the bourbon to my father. As he took the glass, I leaned in. Just an inch. "Do not disrespect my rank in front of my men again," I whispered. My father did not blink. His fake, charming smile never left his face. He leaned his head down, putting his mouth right next to my ear. "Who do you think you are talking to?" he hissed. The words were pure venom sliding through his teeth. "You have those shiny little silver bars because I allow it. I made you Lucia. You are nothing without my last name. Drop the attitude right now, or I will unmake you. I will wipe your pathetic little career off the map. Now step back and smile." He patted my cheek. 2 solid, humiliating taps. I stepped back. I did not feel hot anger. Hot anger makes you reckless. Hot anger makes you scream in a crowded room. I felt cold anger. The kind of anger that slows your heart rate down. The kind of anger you feel right before you pull a trigger. That night, I drove back to my small apartment off base. I did not turn on the radio. I listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I walked into my bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed loudly overhead. The floor tiles were freezing against my bare feet. I unbuttoned my dress blues. I took off the heavy fabric. I stood in front of the mirror in a plain white undershirt. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes. I looked at the scar on my collarbone. I looked at the ghost staring back at me. I placed both hands flat on the cold porcelain sink. I locked eyes with my reflection. "Next time," I whispered to the empty room, "I will not back down." The clock started ticking toward MacDill. The clock in my head stopped. The memory of that night in the bathroom faded, pulling me right back to the cold reality of briefing room Alpha at MacDill. I was still standing. The scrape of my metal folding chair against the floor still hung in the dead air. 200 high-ranking officers stared at me. My father, General Neves, had just ordered me to sit down. He had just called me a confused desk jockey. The sycophants in the front rows were still chuckling at his joke, eager to please the old king. I did not sit down. I did not move. I kept my spine locked straight, my boots planted firm on the cheap linoleum. I did not look at my father. He did not matter anymore. He was just background noise. I looked straight through the crowd, past the shiny brass and the polished leather, locking eyes entirely with Colonel Marcus Hale standing at the podium. Hale did not look at my father. He did not laugh at the joke. He stared back at me, his cold winter ice eyes narrowing slightly as he registered my face. Recognition hit him. The dive bar, the Kandahar Valley, the long rifle. The low, polite laughter in the room began to die off awkwardly. The silence that followed was heavy and thick. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a controlled demolition. "Lucia!" My father barked again. The fake charming smile dropped off his face completely. The ugly red flush of embarrassment and pure rage crept up his thick neck. I said sit down, right now. Colonel Hale raised a single grease-stained hand. He pointed a thick finger right at me. "Call sign," Hale asked. His rough, gravelly voice cut through my father's command like a machete. I did not hesitate. I did not raise my voice. I spoke clearly, letting the words carry the absolute weight of reality. "Ghost 13, I said. "Sierra Tango designation. TS/SCI clearance. Level 5. The words dropped into the room like heavy artillery shells. Level 5. A sharp collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen right out of the briefing room. Several majors and lieutenant colonels physically recoiled, shifting away from me in their seats. You do not just say those words. You earn them in the mud. You earn them with blood. Level 5 is black site access, the kind of clearance that lets you see the dirtiest secrets the Pentagon hides. My father only had level 3. I watched the exact moment his reality shattered. It happened in slow motion. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw unhinged, his mouth dropping open in a silent, pathetic gap. He looked like an old, deflated balloon. He was holding a heavy glass mug of water. His hand started to shake. A violent, uncontrollable tremor. The ice cubes clinked sharply against the thick glass. The noise echoed loudly in the dead quiet room. He stared at me, not as a disappointing daughter, not as a desk jockey. He stared at me like I was a complete stranger who had just kicked the door to his pristine house wide open. Level 5. The whispers started, low, urgent, and panicked. They spread through the rows of chairs like a fast-moving brush fire. Is that Neves's kid? A colonel muttered 2 rows ahead of me. Ghost 13, I read the Kandahar after-action report. That shooter dropped 2 tangos at 1,500 yards in a crosswind, someone else whispered. Does the general not know? How does he not know what his own daughter does? The whispers were not about my insubordination. They were about him. The room was looking at my father, and for the first time in his entire career, they were not looking with respect. They were looking at him with deep, humiliating pity. He was the head of a massive intelligence network, and he did not even know the operational status of the person eating Thanksgiving dinner at his own table. He was a fraud. My father tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The old guard arrogance was completely gone, replaced by pure, naked panic. Colonel Hale slammed his hand flat on the wooden podium. The sharp crack silenced the whispers instantly. Ghost 13. Hale said, his eyes locked on mine. He did not ask permission from the general. He did not acknowledge rank. He only acknowledged capability. Grab your gear. You are with me, right now. Yes, sir, I said. I stepped out of the row. My boots hit the floor with heavy, measured steps. I walked down the center aisle. The officers pulled their knees back, giving me a wide berth. I walked right past the front row, right past my father. As I reached the heavy oak doors, I stopped. I turned my head and looked down at him. He was slouched in his VIP chair, his expensive uniform suddenly looking 2 sizes too big. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, pleading for some kind of connection, pleading for me to protect his ego just one last time. I did not feel anger. I did not feel the bitter, burning resentment that had kept me awake for the last 15 years. I felt absolutely nothing. Just a cold, heavy pity. He was a small, hollow man. If you have ever had to build your own success in the dark because the people who were supposed to support you tried to keep you down, leave a comment saying, "I built myself," and subscribe to the channel. Let them hear our silence. I did not say a single word to him. I turned my back, walked through the heavy doors, and let them slam shut behind me. I stepped out of his world and walked straight into the dark. The black site did not have a name. It was just a string of classified grid coordinates buried somewhere in the desert. The ready room smelled like hot electronics, stale sweat, and Hops No. 9 gun solvent. The air conditioning rattled through exposed tin ducts, fighting a losing battle against the heat radiating from the heavy server racks. I sat on a dented aluminum bench, staring down at my gear. I ran an oily rag over the bolt of my M2-010 enhanced sniper rifle. I pulled it back. The heavy metal mechanism locked into place with a sharp, satisfying clack. It was the sound of absolute control. Down here, the brass from MacDill did not exist. The cocktail parties, the sycophants, the old guard, they could not survive in this room. Down here, you either did the work or you went home in a box. Inside my open canvas duffel bag, my cell phone vibrated. It was a harsh, angry buzz against the metal floor. It had been vibrating constantly for the last 6 hours. I reached in and pulled it out. The screen was cracked, glowing a sickly white in the dim room. 24 missed calls, 16 text messages, all from the same contact. General Neves. The previews of the messages flashed across the lock screen. Answer the phone, Lucia. What the hell did you just do? You are ruining my reputation. Call me back immediately. I stared at the glowing letters. I pictured him pacing the polished hardwood floors of his massive Alexandria house. I pictured the red, sweaty flush of panic on his face. His carefully constructed lie had been blown wide open in front of 200 officers, and he was desperately trying to glue the pieces back together. He was trying to pull the leash. He needed me to answer. He needed me to apologize. He needed me to be the little girl who hid her medals under the bed. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I just felt tired of the noise. I pressed my thumb against the power button. I held it down hard. The screen flickered, went completely black, and the vibration stopped. The silence that followed was beautiful. I tossed the dead piece of plastic and glass back into the duffel bag and zipped it shut. The cord was cut. Ghost. I looked up. Colonel Marcus Hale stood in the doorway. He wore full tactical gear, a plate carrier heavy with rifle magazines, his face smeared with dark camouflage paint. Wheels up in 5, Hale said. His voice was flat. All business. We got a high-value hostage in a reinforced compound. The SEAL team is going to stack on the front door. I need you on the high ground to make sure nobody gets a drop on my boys. He did not ask about my father. He did not care about the drama at MacDill. In his eyes, I was not a woman. I was not a disappointing daughter. I was a precision tool. I am good to go, I said. 4 hours later, I was lying flat on my stomach on a crumbling concrete roof. The grit dug into my ribs through my tactical shirt. The night air was freezing, biting through the fabric, but I did not shiver. I slowed my heart rate down to a slow, steady drum. I looked through the heavy glass of the sniper optic. Down in the valley, 1,400 yards away, the target compound sat entirely in the dark. My earpiece crackled. Hale's voice. Ghost 13. Team is stacked at the breach point. We have movement in the second-floor window. Talk to me. I stared through the crosshairs. The heavy green tint of the night vision illuminated the target. A man standing behind a broken window frame holding an assault rifle aimed directly down at the door where Hale's men were waiting. I ran the math in my head. Cold, hard, mathematical fact. Distance is 1,400 yards, I whispered into the mic. Wind is full value 3 knots out of the east. I reached up with a scarred hand. I clicked the elevation turret. Click, click, click. I adjusted the windage dial. I factored in the Coriolis effect, the actual rotation of the Earth, pulling the heavy bullet off course during a 3-second flight time. At this distance, the bullet would drop over 40 feet before it hit the target. It required absolute perfection. I have the shot, I said. Send it. Hale replied. I exhaled. I let all the oxygen leave my lungs. I squeezed the heavy metal trigger. The rifle kicked back, violently slamming into my shoulder. The muzzle flash briefly blinded the night vision. The heavy, sharp smell of burnt gunpowder filled the roof. 3 seconds passed. 3 seconds of dead silence. Through the scope, the man in the window violently snapped backward and collapsed out of frame. Good hit, Hale's voice crackled. Target neutralized. Breach, breach, breach. I racked the bolt. The smoking brass casing spun out and hit the concrete. I did not smile. I just kept scanning the windows. I was doing my job. 72 hours later, we were back at the black site. The hostage was safe. The team was drinking cheap coffee in the break room. I walked past the command center. Colonel Hale was sitting at a heavy metal desk staring at a computer monitor. He was typing out the top-secret after-action report, the document that would go straight to the Joint Chiefs at the Pentagon. I stopped in the doorway and watched him. He hit the spacebar with a heavy thumb. I read the final sentence glowing green on the screen. Mission success, no casualties. The primary objective was secured due to the overwatch provided by Ghost 13. She's the most valuable asset in this theater. Hale did not look up. He just moved the mouse and clicked submit. The encrypted file fired off into the network. It was officially on the record. I turned around and walked down the cold hallway. The file was gone, and I knew exactly whose desk it was going to land on by morning. I was not in the room to watch the empire burn. I did not need to be. In the military, gossip moves faster than a high-velocity round. The story of what happened in Briefing Room Alpha did not stay behind closed doors. It bled through the concrete walls of MacDill Air Force Base. It caught a flight straight to the Pentagon. It spread through the mess halls, the motor pools, and the secure smoking areas. My father's reputation was his only currency. He spent 30 years building a shiny gold-plated armor of respect, fear, and political influence. It took exactly 10 seconds to strip it entirely off his back. The enlisted guys whispered about it while turning wrenches on the Humvees. The brass snickered over their expensive glasses of imported scotch. The joke wrote itself. Did you hear about Neves? The old man thought his kid was a desk jockey pushing supply requisitions. Turns out she is a level 5 ghost. How the hell does a general run a multi-billion-dollar intelligence network when he does not even know what happens under his own roof? He became a punchline, a paper tiger, a man who demanded total control but held absolutely none. I heard about the phone call 3 days later. Master Sergeant Elena pulled me aside near the base armory. She had friends in communications. She gave me the play-by-play. My father tried to put the fire out the only way he knew how. Intimidation. He sat in his massive climate-controlled office, sweating through the collar of his heavily starched uniform. He bypassed the standard chain of command, picked up the secure receiver, and dialed my direct handler, Lieutenant Colonel Rohr. Rohr was a hard, ugly man. He chewed cheap nicotine gum, drove a beat-up Ford truck, and did not give a single damn about the old guard. My father did not ask nicely. He demanded. He raised his voice, throwing his heavy silver stars around. He barked through the phone line, ordering Rohr to have my complete operational file sent to his desk before the end of the hour. He wanted to see the missions. He wanted to see the kill counts. He wanted leverage. He desperately needed to pull the strings back into his own hands. Lieutenant Colonel Rohr let my father yell. He let the old man exhaust his lungs. Elena said Rohr just sat there staring at a blank wall, chewing his gum with a slow, heavy rhythm. Then Rohr leaned into the receiver and delivered the execution. With all due respect, General Rohr said. His voice was flat, completely dead. You do not possess the required security clearance to access Captain Neves's file. There was a sharp silence on the line. Excuse me, my father snapped. You are not read in on Sierra Tango operations. Rohr continued, his tone brutally bureaucratic. This is a strict need-to-know basis, and you, sir, do not need to know. My father sputtered. He threatened Rohr's career. He threatened to call the Joint Chiefs. He tried to play the father card, screaming that he had a right to know what his daughter was doing. Rohr cut him off, a cold surgical slice. Sir, I strongly advise you to stop harassing my operatives. Furthermore, this is a secure recorded line. Everything you just said has been logged into the central server. Have a good afternoon. Click. A dead dial tone. My father dropped the phone. He was stopped cold by the exact same bureaucratic wall he had used to crush so many lower-ranking soldiers. The system he worshipped, the system he used to threaten me at that cocktail party, had just locked him out in the cold. He had no power here. But the real death of General Arthur Neves did not happen on a secure phone line. It happened on a Friday night at the officers' club. The O Club was his sanctuary. It was a massive room filled with dark mahogany tables, dim yellow lighting, and the heavy smell of roasted beef and expensive cigars. It was the place where he normally held court. Every Friday night, he sat at the center table, surrounded by sycophants laughing at his terrible jokes, buying him drinks, and begging for a scrap of his political influence. That Friday, he walked through the heavy double oak doors. He squared his shoulders. He put on his fake, charming, white-toothed smile. He looked around the room, expecting the usual wave of greetings. Nobody looked back. The majors and colonels, who usually rushed over to pull out his chair, suddenly found their drinks incredibly fascinating. Groups of officers quietly shifted their bodies, turning their backs to the door. Conversations dropped to low, uncomfortable murmurs as he walked past their tables. The clinking of silverware against porcelain suddenly sounded violently loud. The silence was deafening. It was heavier than any screaming match. In the military political machine, weakness is a highly contagious disease. Nobody wanted to catch it. Nobody wanted to be seen drinking with the joke of McDill. He walked to a small empty table in the far back corner. Alone. He sat down heavily in the leather chair. The leather creaked under his weight. A young waiter rushed over, dropped a plate of prime rib in front of him, and quickly walked away without making eye contact or offering to refill his water. My father picked up his heavy silver knife and fork. His hands shook. A slight, pathetic tremor in his fingers. He cut a piece of the meat. He put it in his mouth and chewed it slowly. It tasted like nothing. The steak was cold, tough, and completely tasteless. He sat there in the dark corner, chewing on the cold reality that his entire life was an illusion. The brass on his shoulders meant nothing. The fear he instilled was gone. He looked across the room at the men laughing without him, and he finally realized the truth. He was absolutely nothing. 3 months passed. The dust settled, but it did not disappear. It just coated everything in a thick, heavy layer of reality. I agreed to meet him at a Starbucks off Interstate 95. Neutral ground, no military bases, no dark mahogany officers' clubs. Just a loud, crowded strip mall in Virginia, smelling of burnt espresso beans and cheap vanilla syrup. I sat at a small wobbly metal table in the back corner. The barista yelled out a name over the hiss of the steam wand. I was wearing civilian clothes. Faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a dark canvas jacket. But my back did not touch the chair. My spine was completely straight. My eyes naturally tracked the main entrance, logging every person who walked through the glass door. At exactly 10 in the morning, Arthur Neves walked in. I did not call him General in my head anymore, because he did not look like one. The man who walked through the door had aged 10 years in 3 months. The imposing chest-out swagger was entirely gone. He wore a wrinkled beige sweater and loose khaki pants. His shoulders sagged forward under an invisible weight. His silver hair, usually cut high and tight, was slightly overgrown and unkempt over his ears. The forced retirement had not been kind to him. He spotted me. He hesitated for a second, his hand gripping the edge of a nearby chair before he walked over and sat down across from me. He did not order a coffee. He just placed his hands flat on the scratched metal table. I noticed the liver spots on his skin. I noticed how his fingers trembled slightly. He looked old. He looked incredibly small. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The background noise of the coffee shop filled the dead space. The grinding of coffee beans. The clatter of ceramic mugs. The fake, cheerful pop music playing on the overhead speakers. I did not know, he finally said. His voice was rough, lacking the booming authority that used to rattle the windows of our childhood home. He kept his eyes locked on his shaking hands. About Kandahar. About the level 5 clearance. Your mother and I, we just did not know. It was the classic defense, the shield of ignorance. If he did not know, he could not be held responsible for the cruelty. I looked at him. I did not feel the hot burning urge to scream. I did not want to flip the table or drag him through the mud of my childhood. I had already bled out all that anger in the desert. I just felt a cold, surgical clarity. You did not know because you refused to look, I said. My voice was low, completely flat. He flinched. The words hit him hard, but he immediately reached for his second line of defense, the justification. I only pushed you because I wanted what was best for you. Lucia, he said, his voice pleading, sliding into the familiar groove of the victim. The military is a meat grinder. It destroys people. I wanted to protect you from that. I just wanted my daughter to have a normal, safe life. Is it a crime to want to protect my own blood? He looked up at me, his eyes watering slightly. He wanted absolution. He wanted the fairy tale ending where the daughter cries, forgives the father, and pretends the 15 years of psychological warfare never happened. I did not give him an inch. I leaned forward. I placed my scarred, calloused knuckles on the metal table, resting them right next to his trembling hands. I looked straight into his eyes. Do not insult my intelligence by calling your ego protection, I said. The words cut through the noise of the coffee shop like a straight razor. He stopped breathing for a second. You did not hide my medals to keep me safe. I continued, my voice steady, leaving absolutely zero room for debate. You hid them because a woman outshooting your golden boys made you look weak. You ordered me to fetch your drinks in front of my subordinates because you needed to prove you still owned me. You did not want to protect me. You wanted to erase me. He opened his mouth to argue, to deploy another excuse, but he looked at my face and the words died in his throat. He saw the cold, dead reality in my eyes. He realized he was not talking to a little girl seeking her father's approval. He was talking to Ghost 13. He slowly closed his mouth and swallowed hard. So, he whispered, staring at the metal table. Where do we go from here? This was the line, the absolute boundary. I had read the psychology books. I had spent hours talking to Master Sergeant Elena about how to handle a narcissist. You do not ask for their love. You enforce your borders. I do not need you to be proud of me, I said. Every word was deliberate, weighted. I do not need your apologies, but I demand your respect. He looked up at me, stunned by the coldness of the terms. If we are going to be in the same room together, I said, my voice dropping lower, you will address me as an adult. You will not comment on my career. You will not comment on my clothes. If you ever call me Lucia the little girl in front of another human being, I will walk out of the room and you will never see my face or hear my voice again. Are we completely clear? The pop music kept playing. The espresso machine hissed loudly. Arthur Neves looked at me for a long, heavy minute. The old general fought one last pathetic battle inside his head, trying to find a way to regain control. But there was no leverage left. He had absolutely nothing to threaten me with. Slowly, the tension drained out of his shoulders. He slumped forward. He gave a single tight nod. It was not a loving embrace. It was an unconditional surrender. For the first time in his entire life, he looked at me not as property, but as an equal. I stood up. I did not touch the black coffee in front of me. I pushed my chair back, the metal legs scraping against the tile floor. I turned my back on him and walked toward the glass doors of the Starbucks. I pushed the heavy door open. The cold Virginia air hit my face. I stepped out onto the concrete pavement. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the heavy brass key to his house in Alexandria, and dropped it straight into the black trash can by the door. 10 years is a long time. It is enough time to rebuild a ruined engine. It is enough time to build a life from scratch. The main auditorium at CIA headquarters in Langley smelled like lemon floor wax, fresh coffee, and cold leather. Bright morning sunlight cut through the tall bulletproof glass windows, warming the heavy wooden podium at the front of the room. It was not MacDill Air Force Base. There was no rattling air conditioner unit grinding in the ceiling. There was no stale cigarette smoke trapped in the carpet. There was no old guard laughing loudly in the front row to assert dominance. I stood center stage. I wore my dress blues. They fit perfectly. My spine was locked straight, but the tension was gone. I did not need to hold my breath anymore. General Marcus Hale stood in front of me. He was no longer a colonel. The years had put deep lines around his eyes and gray in his beard, but his grip was still heavy and absolute. He held 2 small silver oak leaves in his calloused fingers. He stepped forward and pinned them to my collar. The sharp metal pierced the dark fabric. Lieutenant Colonel Lucia Neves. Hale stepped back. He did not smile. He offered a slow, hard, perfect salute. I returned it. The room erupted in applause. It was not the forced, nervous clapping of sycophants trying to please a volatile commander. It was a heavy, deafening roar from operators, analysts, and shooters. People who actually knew the weight of the dirt. I dropped my hand and looked out at the crowd. 200 faces. And sitting in the 6th row near the center aisle was my father, Arthur Neves. He did not wear a uniform. He wore a plain gray suit that hung a little too loose on his narrow, aging shoulders. He was completely bald now. His hands rested quietly in his lap, clutching a crumpled paper program. He was not invited to speak at the podium. He did not have a VIP lanyard hanging around his neck. He was just a spectator, a civilian sitting in a folding chair. I caught his eye across the room. He did not look away. He did not try to puff out his chest or fake a booming laugh to draw attention. He just offered a small, quiet smile. It was a sad smile, the exhausted expression of an old man who finally understood the exact cost of his own arrogance. He was looking at the empire I built, knowing he had absolutely zero claim to a single brick of it. I gave him a single brief nod. That was it. The war was over. He stayed in his seat in the audience, and I stayed on the stage. We both knew exactly where the boundary line was drawn, and neither of us would ever cross it again. After the ceremony, the formal structure broke down. Officers mingled near the catered tables in the back. I stood near the heavy oak doors, holding a glass of ice water. The condensation dripped down my fingers. A young woman walked up to me. Second lieutenant. Fresh out of the academy. Her uniform was incredibly stiff, the creases ironed sharp enough to draw blood. She held her plastic cup with a tight, nervous grip. Her knuckles were completely white. I recognized that grip. I knew the desperate, gnawing hunger for validation. I remembered standing in a Virginia hallway holding a military acceptance letter, begging for a scrap of respect from a man who only saw a cocktail waitress. Colonel Neves, the young woman said. Her voice shook slightly over the noise of the room. Congratulations, ma'am. I just got assigned to your intelligence division. I read the unclassified version of your Kandahar file. I want to be exactly like you. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of not being enough. I stepped closer. I did not pat her on the shoulder. I did not give her a fake, patronizing smile. I looked her dead in the eyes. Do not be like me, Lieutenant, I said. My voice was low, flat. Be better. She blinked clearly, surprised by the hard tone. Do the ugly work. I told her my words, cutting through the background chatter. Shoot straight, keep your mouth shut when the brass starts bragging at the bar, and listen to me. She swallowed hard and stood at absolute attention. Do not let anyone define your worth, I said. Not the generals, not the politicians, and absolutely not your own blood. Maya Angelou said she came as one, but stood as 10,000. You earn your space on this floor. Nobody hands it to you. You build it yourself. The young lieutenant let out a slow breath. The nervous shaking in her hands completely stopped. She squared her shoulders. Yes, ma'am. I nodded, turned away from the crowd, and set my glass of water down on a tall table. I walked toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the main courtyard. A 3-star general called out from across the room. Hey, Ghost, we need a picture for the Hall of Fame. I did not stop walking. I pushed the heavy glass bar. The door swung open. The cold Virginia wind hit my face instantly. It smelled like pine needles and wet asphalt. I looked up. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue stretching out endlessly over the tree line. For 15 years, I had to be a ghost to survive my own house. I had to disappear to find my worth in the mud and the sand. I stepped out onto the concrete and let the heavy door slam shut behind me, completely, cutting off the noise of the crowd. I am not a ghost anymore. If you love this story, please leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.